It wasn't the ring that did it. It was the paper. A thin, crumpled piece of paper, creased in 4 places, barely wider than a receipt, folded neatly between a lipstick and a travel-sized perfume bottle. That's what made her hands tremble. That's what silenced the laughter around her. Not the jewelry she once swore she'd never take off. No. It was the sentence I wrote at 3:14 a.m. while staring at an empty kitchen chair she hadn't used in weeks. I didn't plan it. I didn't rehearse it. But that note was the last thing I ever gave her. And it said more than I ever could. Let me tell you how we got there. Last Thursday, she told me she'd be out late. Her voice was too casual. Her smile too mechanical. Like someone acting in a scene they thought I wouldn't notice. But I noticed. I always notice. She was going to a private party, just colleagues, nothing fancy, she said. But the dress she chose was elegant. Too elegant. The kind of dress people remember. She even wore the perfume I gave her for our anniversary last year, the one she used to reserve for nights when she wanted to feel special. That night, apparently, wasn't for me. I should have confronted her then. Should have asked what changed, why her laugh stopped reaching her eyes months ago, why my presence started feeling like a background noise she could mute at will. But I didn't. Instead, I watched her walk out the door like a stranger who knew exactly what she was walking away from. And then I opened the drawer. Second drawer from the top in her nightstand. The one she keeps half closed because it sticks. Inside was the ring. Her wedding ring. Mine, too, since I paid for it with the bonus I got for building an app that nobody uses anymore. It had dust around the edges. Not from neglect. From indifference. I took it. Not out of spite. Out of necessity. I didn't write a letter. Just a single sentence. Then I folded it like I used to fold notes in high school. Back when words still meant something. No return address. No explanation. Just wait. Pure emotional wait. At 9:42 p.m., I drove to the address she had left on the table days before, scribbled in blue pen on a post-it note next to our dog's expired flea medication. The address of her colleague's private gathering. A place where laughter echoed off marble countertops and expensive wine dulled whatever guilt lingered in the air. I didn't ring the bell. I didn't step inside. I simply walked past the row of parked cars, found hers by the curb, and slipped the envelope into her purse through the open passenger side window. The same purse I bought her when she got promoted and told me she was finally becoming the woman she always wanted to be. It was all there. The ring. The note. The truth. I didn't wait to see what happened next. But I didn't have to. Because by 11:18 p.m., she had left 12 voicemails. By 11:24 p.m., she messaged, "What did you do?" And by midnight, she came home to a house that looked the same, but felt like a tomb. She called my name. I didn't answer. Because I wasn't there. Not anymore. And the note she found? It read, "You took me off long before you took off this ring." I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even sit. I just paced in slow circles around the dining room table, the same one where we'd once argued over which side of the plate the fork should go on. I remember her saying, "Why does it matter? It's just dinner." But it mattered to me, because back then, I still believed in the little things. Still thought order could stop something from falling apart. Now the house was dead quiet. The kind of silence that presses in on your ribs. I stared at the digital clock blinking 2:17 a.m., each second a reminder that she hadn't come back yet. I wasn't surprised. I knew she wouldn't. But then the phone buzzed. Not her. It was her sister, Becca. Now that surprised me. Becca and I had always had an odd relationship. Civil, but not warm. She once told me I was too mild for Callie. Said I was like a cardigan in a room full of leather jackets. I remember that stung. A lot. But tonight, she wasn't smug. She sounded shaken. "Merritt," she whispered. "She's freaking out." "What did you do?" I swallowed hard. "What did I do?" "Becca, she—" "I know," she cut in. "I know. I've known for weeks." That froze me. She went on fast, like she was afraid she'd lose her nerve if she slowed down. Apparently, Callie had been seeing Brandon for nearly 6 months. The same Brandon I'd met once at a holiday work mixer. The one with perfect teeth and a handshake that felt like a sales pitch. Becca said she'd begged Callie to stop. Told her she was throwing away the only man who ever treated her with actual kindness. But Callie, according to Becca, said she felt caged and wanted a thrill again. So she gambled with our marriage like it was some dusty casino chip she could toss toward the edge of a table just to see if the universe would blink. I warned her, Becca whispered, that if she lost you, there wouldn't be a rewind button. I didn't know what to say. I was numb, still trying to process the fact that the one person who always seemed on Callie's side was now saying this. She's been calling everyone. She's afraid you'll go public or vanish. That last word landed hard. Because she was right. I had vanished. Not physically. I was still here, breathing, pacing, staring at a house full of furniture that felt like it belonged to someone else. But emotionally, I had walked off the cliff hours ago, and there was no landing in sight. After I hung up with Becca, I checked my phone. 19 missed calls from Callie. 5 voicemails. All of them variations of confusion, rage, fear. The last one was different, though. It was quiet. Almost broken. Merritt, please don't do anything stupid. We can talk. I didn't mean for it to get this far. But it did. And that's the thing people like her never grasp. Actions don't come with rewind buttons. You don't get to unkiss someone. You don't get to unlie. And you sure as hell don't get to slide a ring off your finger and pretend it still means something when it's convenient. That night, I opened a fresh notepad on my computer. I didn't write to her. I wrote to myself. A letter, of sorts. Titled, Don't Forget This Feeling. Because I knew what would come next. The apologies. The rewrites. The emotional cleanup crew that would march in behind the wreckage to repaint everything in softer colors. But I didn't want to forget the look on her face when she opened that purse and found my note. I didn't want to forget the electricity that surged in my chest, not anger, not revenge, but clarity. The kind that only comes after being in the dark for too long. And I definitely didn't want to forget that, for the first time in years, I was the one who left first. The doorbell rang just before sunrise. I already knew who it was, but I didn't move. Because this time, she could wait. The knocking wasn't loud. It was hesitant, like she knew that every sound might echo with consequences. I stood a few feet from the door, barefoot on the cold hardwood, coffee untouched in my hand, staring at the handle. There was a time when I would have rushed to open it the second she pulled into the driveway. Back then, I would have been relieved just to see her home, to know she was safe. That time was over. I didn't open the door. I opened the folder instead. The one I'd hidden on my desktop under a boring name, Utilities. It wasn't electricity bills inside. It was screenshots, voice memos, backed up texts. You see, when you start to feel like a ghost in your own home, you start documenting proof that you're still real. I never meant to collect it. But when I saw the first message months ago, a flirty little thing from B, I took a screenshot. And then another. And then a dozen more. Because a part of me needed to know I wasn't imagining it. That folder was a graveyard of tiny betrayals. Late night, work events. Business trips that never appeared on her calendar. A photo of her in that maroon coat, the one she said she hadn't worn in forever, sitting across from a man who very clearly wasn't anyone from her office. She looked happy. So relaxed. Like someone free. Meanwhile, I'd spent those same nights reheating leftovers, talking to the dog like he understood me, and refreshing her location on my phone even though she disabled it weeks ago. Yeah, I know how that sounds. Pathetic. Weak. But that's who I was. The guy who waited. Who gave her room to breathe, thinking love meant stepping aside when really, she just kept walking farther away. The knocking stopped. Silence returned, but it was the kind of silence that felt sharp, like it had edges. I imagined her on the porch, reading the note again and again, trying to decode its meaning. You took me off long before you took off this ring. It was true. She left me in the emotional rearview mirror a long time ago. She just never hit the brakes to admit it. My phone lit up again. This time it wasn't a call. It was a notification from our joint cloud account. A shared drive that hadn't been used in months. She'd uploaded a file titled, For Merit. I opened it. It was a letter. Typed. No greeting. No formatting. Just cold, black text on a white background like a legal confession. And in a way, it was. She admitted to the affair. She called it a mistake that became an escape. Said she never planned for it to last this long, that it started after a fight we had last spring about something stupid, me forgetting to take out the trash before the bins were collected. That argument, the one I thought we moved on from in a day, apparently stayed lodged in her chest like a splinter. She said Brandon made her feel alive, and that with me, she had started to feel like she was drowning in predictability. That's the thing no one prepares you for. You can do everything right. You can be loyal, gentle, supportive, even boring in all the good ways, and still lose. Not because you failed, but because someone else walked in offering the thrill of destruction disguised as passion. She ended the letter with, I didn't mean to hurt you, Merritt. I never stopped loving you. I just forgot how. I stared at the screen for a long time. My hands were cold. I read it again, then a third time, and then I clicked download and saved it to a USB. Not for revenge, not to share, just to remind myself that it was real, that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined my slow erasure from her world. The doorbell rang again, longer this time, followed by 3 soft knocks. I didn't answer. Instead, I walked to the kitchen, unplugged the coffee maker, and began pulling things out of the cabinets. One by one. Dishes, mugs, a pan with a scratched surface. Everything we'd bought together. Everything that still had her fingerprints on it. I packed 2 boxes. Not in a rage. Calmly. Deliberately. Then I labeled one hers, and the other not anymore. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about infidelity. It was about absence. She left the relationship long before she walked out the door. Her body stayed. Her eyes still smiled for social media. But the part of her that once leaned into me during thunderstorms, that reached for my hand at red lights, that hummed while brushing her teeth, was long gone. And the man she ran to? He wasn't stealing her. He was just holding what she already let go of. Outside, the car engine started. I peeked through the blinds just as her taillights disappeared around the corner. She didn't knock again. And this time, I didn't feel like a man being left behind. I felt like a man waking up. By the next morning, something in the air had shifted, like the pressure had dropped just before a storm. The kind of heaviness you can feel in your bones before you even open your eyes. My body felt drained, but my mind was running full speed, fueled by a quiet rage I didn't even know I was capable of. Not the kind that screams or smashes plates. No, this was colder. Controlled. The kind of anger that organizes drawers and makes backup copies. She still hadn't come back. She hadn't sent another message since that letter in the cloud folder. I suppose she was giving me space. Or maybe she was too busy trying to decide how to play the next move. But I wasn't waiting anymore. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting. Instead, I went to work. And by work, I mean I opened an old voice memo app one hadn't used in forever and pressed record. Then I spoke into the mic calm. Even. No yelling. Just facts. Details. Dates. Names. Things she couldn't lie her way out of. I told my side. Not to share publicly or to threaten her, but because I knew her. Knew how she'd rewrite the story to make it feel softer, blurrier, less cruel. Callie always had a talent for reframing. She'd once convinced a friend that her forgetting his birthday was actually his fault for not sending a reminder. And he believed her. She smiled while doing it. Like her words weren't razor sharp under the sugar. So I recorded my truth. Not to hurt her, but to protect my own sanity. When I was done, I saved it and sent it to just one person, her father. I know, that sounds harsh, but hear me out. He was the only one in her family who ever really saw me. He once pulled me aside after our wedding and told me, "She burns bright, Merritt. Just don't let her set herself on fire." I didn't know what he meant at the time. Now I do. He replied an hour later with just 2 words, "I'm sorry." That hit harder than I expected. It felt like someone finally acknowledging the quiet devastation I'd been living through. And maybe that was what I needed. Just one person who didn't look at me like I was crazy for unraveling over a woman who still posted smiling selfies. After that, I started clearing the rest of the house. Not selling things. Just removing them. Her shoes from the hallway. The framed quote in the bathroom she never believed in anyway. "Love is not a maybe thing," it said. A lie, clearly. Then I opened the bottom drawer of her dresser. The one she thought I didn't know she used to stash receipts and half-finished thoughts. Inside was a stack of handwritten notes. Some were to me. Most were never given. But one in particular caught my eye. It was dated almost a year ago. "I'm not in love with him anymore," it read. "But I don't think I can leave. He hasn't done anything wrong. He's just too still, too quiet. Like nothing ever changes. I don't want to hurt him, but I can't keep living like this." I read it 3 times. It was the most honest thing she'd ever written. And the most cowardly. Because instead of leaving, she stayed and eroded both of us. I folded the note and placed it on top of the box labeled hers. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I made a plan for myself. Not for us. Not for reconciliation. For me. I booked a 2-week stay in a little cabin 2 hours north. Just a modest place with no TV, weak Wi-Fi, and a view of the lake I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. Somewhere I could breathe again. Somewhere silence might feel less like punishment and more like peace. I left her a message on the kitchen counter, next to the coffee maker she never used but insisted we buy because it looked nice. It said, "Don't worry. I'm not running away. I'm just finally walking somewhere else." No threats. No demands. Just closure she never expected to get from me. And I locked the door behind me like I was closing the final chapter of a book I never wanted to read again. As I pulled out of the driveway, I glanced at the rearview mirror. The house stood still, like it was holding its breath. I didn't look back a second time. I made it to the cabin just after dusk, with the last streaks of sunlight falling behind the line of pines that bordered the lake. The place was simple. 2 rooms, a fireplace, no signal, and the kind of creaky wooden floors that made every step feel like it had weight. I unpacked slowly, deliberately. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I had to rush. There were no shadows behind me. No eyes watching, judging, calculating what version of me they preferred. I lit a fire, brewed a cup of black coffee on the stove, and sat on the old rocking chair by the window. Outside, the lake reflected the early stars like shattered glass. It was quiet, but not the kind of silence that suffocates. This was the kind of quiet that offers space to think, to unravel, to rebuild. I should have known it wouldn't last. 2 days in, I started hearing things outside at night. Not animals, not wind, human footsteps. I didn't panic at first. Could have been someone staying nearby. But this wasn't the kind of area where people happened to be passing through. There were no other cabins on this stretch. Just mine. On the 3rd morning, I stepped outside to find a familiar car parked halfway down the dirt road, half hidden, like someone didn't want to be seen. I stood there for a long time, arms folded, heart sinking. Then I heard it. Merritt. Her voice. I closed my eyes and let out a slow breath before turning around. She was standing at the edge of the woods in that same soft green coat she wore to the party. Her hair pulled back, face pale, eyes swollen from crying or lack of sleep. Or maybe both. She looked small, not just physically, spiritually, like someone deflated after a fight they didn't win. I didn't say anything. She took a step closer. I didn't know where else to go. I nodded just once. "So you came here, after all of it." "I didn't come to argue," she said quickly, "or to make excuses." "Good," I said, because I wouldn't listen. She flinched, and for a moment, I hated how much that still hurt to see. I hated that even now, part of me still cared about her feelings, that I had to fight the instinct to soften. But I wasn't the man she left behind. Not anymore. "I read the note you left on the counter," she said quietly. "I think it's the first time you've ever walked away from me." "It's the first time I had to," I replied. "Because you wouldn't stop taking steps in the opposite direction." She didn't respond. Just stood there, staring at the cabin like it held answers she'd never find in our old house. "I was scared," she finally said. "I was tired of feeling numb, and I didn't know how to say that to you without breaking something." "You didn't say anything," I said. "You just broke it anyway." Callie stepped closer, arms wrapped around herself. "I know I don't deserve anything from you. Not even this conversation. But I had to see you." I stared at her. For the first time, really stared. Not through the lens of what we were, but what she'd become. And I realized something gutting. She wasn't the villain in some dramatic story. She was just a coward. A coward who couldn't be alone with herself long enough to grow. So she used me as a mirror until she hated what she saw. And instead of fixing what was broken, she blamed the reflection. "I'm not coming back," I said. "I know," she whispered. I needed to hear it from you." We stood there in silence for a few long beats, the fire from inside crackling behind me, casting long shadows through the open doorway. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small. "My voice recorder. I found this," she said. "In your drawer." I listened. My chest tightened. "You weren't supposed to." "I know," she said. "But I did. And it made me realize how much I edited you in my head. How many times I convinced myself you were the problem when I never even gave you a chance to be seen." She held the recorder out to me. I didn't take it. "I'm not him anymore," I said. "Whatever man you remembered, the quiet one, the patient one, he died somewhere between your texts and my silence." A tear slipped down her cheek. She nodded. Then she turned and walked back to her car, steps slower than when she'd arrived. I didn't follow. I didn't call after her. I didn't offer comfort. I just stood there, watching the woman I once would have begged to stay, finally leave without needing to be asked. And in that silence, I found something I never expected to feel again. Peace. 3 days passed after she left the cabin. I didn't hear a word. No texts. No emails. No missed calls. Nothing. It should have felt like a relief. Finally, silence without suspense. But the truth is, it only left space for the weight of everything she said to echo even louder. I replayed the conversation a dozen times in my head, each time wondering what would have happened if I had said something different, if I had softened, if I had asked her to stay. But I didn't, because something inside me finally understood the difference between grief and surrender. And I had grieved enough. I wasn't going to surrender again. I spent the next morning walking through the woods near the cabin, letting the cold air scratch at my lungs and reminding myself I was alive. It felt strange, like learning to breathe again in a world that no longer revolved around keeping someone else happy. I watched ducks skimming the lake, picked up pine cones and tossed them into the water like I was 12 again. Somewhere in those quiet, pointless moments, I began to feel something new forming inside me. Not happiness. Not yet. But possibility. That's why I wasn't prepared when I opened my email that night and saw her name sitting there like a ghost. Subject: for when you're ready. I hesitated for a long time. I could have deleted it. Should have, maybe. But I opened it. Of course I did. Inside was a document. A formal apology. Structured like some bizarre resignation letter. Paragraphs. Headings. She had even bolded parts. It read like a list of confessions she'd prepared in therapy, the kind they make you recite to reclaim accountability. Only there was a difference between accountability and self-preservation, and this felt like the latter. She admitted everything again. The affair. The lies. The disconnection she didn't want to admit at the time. She said she sabotaged what we had because she thought I'd never leave, and that made her resent me in ways she didn't understand. You were the constant, she wrote, and I punished you for it. But near the end, there was a shift in tone. That's when the catch appeared. She mentioned something about the house, our house. Technically, it was under both our names, but I had paid off the majority of the mortgage long before she ever moved in. Now she wanted to talk about options. She asked if we could meet. Somewhere neutral, she wrote. Just to talk through the logistics like adults. Maybe a coffee shop or somewhere you feel comfortable. I stared at the screen, jaw clenched. It hadn't even been a week, and she was already angling for damage control. That's what hurt the most. Not that she cheated. Not that she lied, but that even now, even in the aftermath of all her devastation, she still thought I was the kind of man who could be finessed. She still didn't get it. I closed the laptop and pushed it aside, but I couldn't sit still. I grabbed a notepad and started scribbling. Not a reply, not a letter, just thoughts, bullet points, the kinds of things I'd never said out loud, even to myself. Things like, she said I was too quiet, but she never stopped to listen. Every time she smiled at her phone, a part of me wilted. I should have asked more questions, but I was terrified of the answers. Love isn't about fixing someone. It's about not having to break yourself to keep them whole. I stopped writing when I realized my hand was trembling. My fingers were numb from gripping the pen too tightly. That's how deeply buried the truth had been inside me, so deep it hurt to let it out. The next morning, I drove into the nearest town, found a coffee shop with terrible Wi-Fi, and sat in the far corner with a cup of over-roasted beans. I pulled out my phone and finally replied to her email. Subject: I don't think you're ready to hear this. I wrote, Callie, you always had a way with words. You made people believe in things, even me. But your apology isn't a repair manual. It's a receipt. And I'm not buying anything from you anymore. You want to talk logistics? Fine. I'll have my attorney reach out with a summary of what I intend to do with the house. This doesn't have to be a war. But we're not meeting for coffee. I spent too many years sipping bitterness in silence. I won't drink it with you now. And I hit send. Outside, a storm was rolling in. The trees bent, and the first drops of rain began to drum against the windshield of my car. But I didn't run from it. I stepped into it. Let it soak my shoulders, my hair, my clothes, everything. Because for the first time in years, I felt clean. I should have known she wouldn't let it go quietly. Callie had always been an artist when it came to shaping the narrative. It wasn't just what she said, it was what she didn't say, what she implied, what she hinted at with just enough fragility to look like the victim in every room. I had watched her do it for years with friends, coworkers, even her own mother. But I never thought she'd do it to me. Not until I received the message from one of our mutual friends, Jonah. It was subtle at first. Hey man, heard you guys are going through something. That sucks. I didn't respond right away. I just sat there rereading the text, wondering what exactly he'd been told. 2 hours later, another message came from a different friend, Leah. Same tone, slightly more invasive. Callie mentioned you're taking some space to process things emotionally. I hope you're okay. Let us know if you need anything. Emotionally? That word stung. It sounded like I'd gone off the rails. Like I'd broken down and couldn't function. Like I was the unstable one in the story. I wasn't mad at Leah. Or Jonah. I was mad because I knew Callie was doing what she always did, laying the foundation for a future where she came out clean. She couldn't stop herself. Even after everything, she still wanted control over how the world saw her. And I wasn't about to let her. I didn't reply to either of them. Not at first. Instead, I opened my phone and stared at the folder of receipts I'd compiled, the texts, the photos, the audio. I wasn't planning to go nuclear. I wasn't looking for revenge. But I was done sitting in silence while she spun the story like I was just a fragile man who got overwhelmed. So I made a choice. I met with a lawyer. Her name was Celine, sharp as broken glass and twice as dangerous. I didn't pick her for sympathy. I picked her because during our first meeting, she leaned forward, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "You don't need to burn her house down. You just need to take back the one she tried to steal from you." That was enough for me. I handed Celine everything. The timeline, the proof, the bank transfers, the evidence that Callie had started draining our joint account in small increments months ago, always just under the threshold that would trigger alerts. It was meticulous, calculated, and yet careless in the way all cheaters eventually get. While Celine drafted the paperwork to separate the finances and formally propose I take over the house, I did something I never thought I'd do. I reached out to Callie's father. We met at a diner. Neutral territory. It was raining again, as if the universe was trying to give me mood lighting. He showed up in a tan jacket, looking 10 years older than the last time I'd seen him. He shook my hand longer than necessary. When we sat, he said, "She told me you left her, that you couldn't handle the marriage anymore." I nodded, then pulled out my phone. I didn't show him everything, just enough. Enough for him to see the text between her and Brandon. The ones where she joked about how I still asked for permission to kiss her like some 1950s dork. I waited while he read in silence. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he exhaled slowly and whispered, "She's becoming her mother." That was all he said, and that was all I needed to hear. Before he left, he put his hand on my shoulder. "I don't know what's next for her, but you need to get as far from this version of her as possible." I drove back to the cabin that night feeling oddly at peace. Not triumphant. Not vindicated. Just still. I lit a fire, poured a glass of bourbon I'd been saving, and sat by the window again. Then, for the first time in weeks, I wrote something for me. Not in anger. Not to defend myself. Just to remember. You weren't the storm, Merritt. You were the lighthouse. She just liked drowning more than being saved. The next morning, I woke up to another message from Leah. "I'm sorry. I didn't know the whole story. Callie told us something completely different." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because now, the story wasn't hers to tell anymore. It was mine. And I was just getting started. The first day I walked back into the house, my house, it didn't feel like coming home. It felt like entering the ruins of something sacred that had been vandalized. But I didn't flinch. I moved from room to room like I was assessing a crime scene, one detail at a time. I found the little candle she used to light in the evenings, now just wax and dust. The mug I had bought her in New Orleans, still chipped at the rim. Her smell lingered faintly on the throw blanket draped over the couch, like an echo of who she used to be before everything soured. But the difference was, this time, I wasn't here to grieve it. I was here to reclaim it. Within 2 weeks, the legal agreements were finalized. Callie's name was off the house. The joint accounts were separated, and she received a modest settlement. No drama, no theatrics. She tried one last time to meet for closure. I declined. Closure is something you create for yourself, not something someone else hands you like a consolation prize. And I already had mine. Celine, my lawyer, told me I'd handled the whole thing with more dignity than most. I told her dignity was all I had left after years of being overlooked. She smiled and said, "Not anymore." After the paperwork was signed, I took a road trip. Not to run, not to escape, but to breathe in places where no one knew my name. I hiked through red canyons in Arizona, sat on the edges of cliffs and screamed into the wind, not out of anger, but because it felt good to finally fill the silence with my own voice. At a roadside diner in Colorado, I struck up a conversation with a woman named Eloise. Not a romantic spark, not a grand moment. Just two tired souls laughing over bad coffee and shared exhaustion. She was a traveling artist who lived out of a van half the year. She had paint on her knuckles and a laugh that didn't apologize for taking up space. We talked for hours. I told her some of the story. Not all, just enough. You know, she said, spinning her spoon in her cup. Sometimes you have to burn down the version of yourself that settled for too little before you can build anything real. I don't know if I'll ever see her again, but I won't forget that line. When I returned home, I made changes. Real ones. I painted the living room a deep blue, the color of dusk. I got rid of the mattress we used to share. Bought a new one. Bought a new chair for the porch. Canceled the old streaming accounts we signed up for together and started over. These things might sound small, but they mattered. Because they were mine. One morning, I found a letter in my mailbox. Handwritten. From her. She said she was moving out of state. That she'd started therapy. That she'd let Brandon go months ago and had no idea where he was now. She wished me peace. Hoped I'd someday forgive her. And then she wrote, "You were the kindest man I've ever met. I didn't deserve that version of you." She was right. She didn't. But I'm glad she knew. I stood by the fireplace that night with that letter in my hand. I didn't cry. I didn't ache. I tossed it into the fire and watched it burn, not in bitterness, but with finality. Then I opened the windows. Let the fresh air in. Later, I found the old voice recorder and pressed play. My voice sounded different then. Fragile. Almost apologetic. It made me wince. But I let it play. All of it. Because that was the man who stood through it all. And now he was standing taller. Today, I'm not healed. But I'm healing. And that, to me, is better than any apology. So here's what I've learned. Sometimes the person who breaks you is the same person you once would have begged to fix you. But healing starts the moment you stop waiting at a door they've already walked through and start building a new one for yourself. And me? I built that door. And I walked right through it. Into something quieter. Something honest. Something new.